So, hello everybody and welcome. I don't know how many this is, but I think I've been doing this now for about a year. And I thoroughly enjoy it because it means that once a month I get an opportunity to have a conversation with somebody who I find really interesting, somebody who I believe is passionate about leadership. And this month it's somebody called Anita Bath. And she's CEO of a trust in the Northeast, Berwick. I can never remember the name, Berwick something Trust. She'll tell you when she introduces it. Um, and I think, responsible for quite a lot of schools. From memory, I think it's about 39 schools. So it's really quite a pretty large job. And before I hand over and ask Anita to introduce herself, tell us a little bit about her, maybe about her background, why she now does what she does. And obviously, we will get on to the subject of leadership. I want to say how impressed I am with something, because one of the things that we come across in almost every organization that we work in, be it a SME, be it a huge corporate, it doesn't matter. We nearly always find that people in position are nearly always technically very, very good at what they do. But quite often, they don't understand leadership. They haven't had the opportunity to understand leadership. And for me, I think it's very exciting and interesting that somebody who's recognizing that that can be just as true in schools, that teachers are brilliant at what they do. They're brilliant academically, but they probably never had an insight into real leadership, what leadership's about, and the impact it can have on themselves and on the young people they teach. So it's very exciting for me personally that Anita has joined us on this journey, saying, I'm really beginning to get my head around the importance of this and wanting to ensure that that becomes part of where she works. So that's really exciting for me. So, Anita, thank you so much for giving up your time today to come and have this conversation with me. And it would be great. I'm going to hand over to you now to tell people a little about who you are, why you do what you do, and maybe where your leadership journey even began.
Okay, right. Thank you, Penny. Okay, yes. So you nearly got the name right. It's Bishop Bewick. But yes, it's the northeast of England. We have schools that kind of run along the Tyne, so in Newcastle upon Tyne, and then up through Newcastle, North Tyneside, and into Northumberland. And our last school is in Berwick, which is on the Scottish border. So it's a pretty big geographical area. So 39 schools, children from 3 through to 19. Last count, I think we've got over 14,000 students in the trust and over 2,000 staff. So yeah, it's a pretty big multi-academy trust. There are a lot that are bigger in the country, but yeah, we are a pretty large one. So that's where I am now. So you've asked me to talk a little bit about, I suppose, how I ended up here, what drives me. So I'll go back maybe to the very earliest influences, and that was my family, my parents. So my parents came over to England in the 1950s, both from Ireland. I think that's a very common story. Lots of Irish migrants coming over in the 50s. Neither of them had what you would call any real kind of proper or formal education. My father in particular had left school when he was 13. So they came over here in their late teens and made a good life for themselves. My mother ended up nursing, which she did for many, many years, and my father was an HGV driver. He drove the wheelie bins around London, so he knew the back streets of Lambeth very well. And they really imbued in me and my brother a massive sense of hard work, but also the value of education. So I had it drilled into me from the time I was tiny that education was your way out. You know, if you worked hard at school and you did well, you'd make a good life for yourself. And so, there was no shirking from homework for me or for John. The TV did not go on until that was done. And we were very much pushed and cajoled, I think a little bit in my case, to work very hard. And it paid off. So the pair of us, I think I was the first person in the extended family to go to university, and my brother did as well. And we've both had, really interesting careers that we're very thankful for. And that drive to ensure that all children have access to a very good education, I think is something that has been at the core of my purpose really throughout my career. There's one more story I'll share, because I think it's a powerful one, and it really gets to the core of I suppose what I want to try and do. When my father was 80, my mother had recently died. He was on his own, and they'd always lived in London and Kent. So he'd not come up and visited the school that I was head of at the time. I was head of a lovely, beautiful girls' school in Newcastle, absolutely gorgeous school. And I invited him up, and my brother brought him. And we spent a lovely afternoon. We wandered around. It was a big site. It was, as I say, it was a beautiful school, really, really stunning. And we ended up in my office at the end of it. And Dad was very quiet. And when I looked at him closely, he was welling up. And I was like, Dad, what's the matter? Because he wasn't a man who would do that ordinarily. And he looked at me and he said, I wonder what I could have been if I'd gone to a school like this one.
Oh, wow.
And it really, really kind of, it was like somebody punched me. And I could see that aged 80, there was that sense of injustice still, that he hadn't had the chances in life maybe that he could have had. And that in some ways, he felt a little bit unfulfilled with what he'd achieved, despite, the fact he was the most amazing father, husband, he'd done so well for himself. That sense of a life that could have been lived wasn't there. And I don't want other children to feel that. I don't want other adults to look back on their lives, having been to one of our schools, and think, I didn't get where I could have been because the education let me down, the school let me down. So that's really at the core of what I think we're about, what we try to do in our community of schools. So in terms of career, I always laugh at this because I don't know how I ended up being chief executive, because I never set out to be a leader in the first place. I kind of fell into teaching. I left university, worked in a few companies. Nothing seemed a good fit. I didn't feel a purpose to what I was doing. So I kind of drifted into teaching a bit. My mother had always said I'd be a good teacher, so you always do what your mum tells you. So anyway, I became a teacher, started training at about 22. So 23, I went into it. I was an English teacher, secondary school. I did that thing where I worked in a few schools, moved around because of my husband's job, had our children. And then early 30s, I got that little tap on the shoulder. When someone says, oh, there's a job coming up, you might want to go for it. That was a head of department job. And I was like, really? Okay, all right, I'll give it a go. And I got it. Problem being, I wasn't really sure what I was supposed to do. So I got this job. I can remember sitting there thinking, oh, what does the head of department do? And in those days, I don't think there was a lot of training. You kind of relied a little bit on working with good leaders yourself. So you kind of picked a bit up from them, and you picked a bit up from the ones that you didn't think were very good, and off you went. But then that was the same pattern when I went into senior leadership, and then a deputy head teacher, and even eventually a head teacher. Now, there was training along the way, in two kind of methods. The first was that I was very lucky. So the secondary school I worked in at the time was a really good one, and the head was an inspirational man, and he really understood what you needed to do to make a great school. So he spent a lot of time kind of like working with us, coaching us, constantly getting us to reflect upon, well, why are we doing this, and what are we trying to achieve? So that was good. And you see that still in the best schools. You know, you see good leaders have often come through, we'll call it a stable, you know, they've come through that stable, and here they are, and they're very strong. But it's a very ineffective method, because it's depending on you being in the right place. The other thing that you tend to get is, I'd call it good management training, or there's a lot that will help you develop your expertise in a particular area. So, you know, in schools, it might be how to run a really strong curriculum, how to look at the kind of behaviour pastoral side of schools, and a whole kind of host of other things. So that's got a lot better over the years, certainly since I was a youngster. But what I never experienced, and still haven't, I mean, you know, was what you get from the personal leadership program. So when I did that, which was a couple of years ago, I think that was the first time that I thought, crikey, this is really at the heart of how you as a leader develop your people and get the best out of your people. And I think we do that in schools, but maybe not explicitly. It's wrapped up in what else you're doing, but it's never been the real kind of like primary focus. And that for me has been the power of it. And I think it's how we met, because, you know, I think I did the programme a couple of years ago in Winchester. And it has been has had a significant impact on me, and now on the trust that I lead.
Well, I have to say, I really love what you just shared about your father. I mean, I think that's so powerful and so sad, and that'll stick with you. That'll be something that'll be at the heart of your values.
Yeah.
Because of him saying that. And that was a really powerful thing to say. Before I go on to ask any questions, I just would like to say, please recognize this is a webinar, but you have an opportunity here, especially if you have children at school or anything like that, to ask Anita questions. So for goodness sake, please grab the opportunity. If you want to ask any questions, there's things that you hear Anita say, there's things that you want to share that you've heard that have meaning for you, please do just type in the questions, and put my specs on and endeavour to read any through. So that would be really good. So Anita, I mean, one of the things that's interesting, what you said about people learning about leadership, I agree with our programme. In some ways, it's bringing back to people's conscious awareness that which they already know, but they don't know it at a level enough to do something about it.
Yeah.
Again, when I look at the corporate world, and I don't know how true this is in the teaching world, you can tell me, but let's say that you get a company where you have a very good salesperson and they're really, really good, and somebody decides they're so good they need to be promoted to being a supervisor or a manager. And so they get offered the job and they accept it, and they go home on Friday as a salesperson, and they come back on Monday as a manager, and there's meant to have been some sort of osmosis over the weekend that teaches them these skills. And we get countless people who come on the programme who've been in probably management and very senior roles for years and say, God, I wish I'd done this years ago. You know, and I don't know how true that is in teaching, whether you get people who move up through whether you call them the ranks or whatever you call them as you moved up. And do they get given any insight into the difference between management and leadership, how critical it is to understand it? Do they currently, I know that you're endeavouring to bring it in, But before that, do they get anything that gives them any insight in the difference and how important it is as a teacher to understand more about leadership?
It's a good question, Penny. I think it's patchy is probably the answer. I think there are some very good programs out there. And usually what happens is that hopefully in schools, staff will get the opportunity to go on to these kind of programs before they get the role. But that's not always the case. Certainly, I think discussions around the difference between leadership and management are discussions that we've had for a number of years, and that does exist in a number of the programs that are available to education staff. But I've never seen it done as well as in the personal leadership program, because you're quite right with that notion of making explicit something that probably you kind of, a wisdom that you've accrued, something that you know, but it's just such a powerful way of doing it. So the philosophy is there, but also then the language, the framework to hang it on. I mean, even I think it's so powerful, the use of colour, just having that green thread that goes all the way through means that as a leader within your own team, you can then go back and make it more explicit for your own team, and you can develop the people that you work with in a way that I've not seen before. So that's what I think maybe the difference is. So yes, there are opportunities for staff to develop before they go on into a new role, but I don't think that's always the case, and I don't think it's been as good as it could be. Certainly not in my experience, and we put a lot of people through PLP now, and that's one of the first things they say. They say, crikey, I've never done anything like this before. I wish I'd done this years ago. So, that would suggest that maybe we haven't quite got it right in education yet. I think we've still got a long way to go.
Excuse me. Remind me, how many people have you currently put through the program? I know you're about to put some more through. How many have you currently?
Yeah. Well, we've been doing it for a year now, and we've used a mixture of so we've got our own trainer, Penny. So one of my executive team, Nicola Taylor, has been a trainer for the program for a while. So Nicola's led I think 2 cohorts. And then some other trainers have led, I think we've had another 2, so that's 4. And then we've put some people some leaders we've actually put on programs with external people down in Winchester and various other places. So I'm going to say we tend to run 8 to 10. So we've probably done a good 40 or 50 leaders so far. So it's a mixture of heads, deputies, senior staff within our kind of associate team of staff, because obviously in a multi-academy trust you've got a huge finance team and HR staff and so forth. So we've made it available to those staff as well. And
what sort of impact have you seen that it's had on the people who've been through it?
Profound in a number of cases. So we've tried it out with people at different stages of their career. So heads who've been in position for some time, new heads as well, and we've seen a range of reactions. So I have to be careful, because in an organisation our size, sometimes it's easy to identify people, so I'll be a little bit circumspect. But let's just say some leaders who may have been in schools that really needed improvement and fast improvement, and they're new to that organisation, so they've got a big task. And that's a hard thing to do as a new head or even a new deputy head teacher. And what this has done is given them a framework for really understanding how, when you're putting an organization through really rapid change and you're asking a lot of your staff, that you really do need to not go down that glue route, not go down the push route all the time, that you have to get them to work with you, you have to inspire them, you have to listen to them. So it's given them some tools, I think, to navigate some very, very difficult work that they need to do. And that's come out in the feedback from especially some of the younger heads, the new heads. Older heads have literally come back and gone, wow, why didn't I do that years ago? I mean, that's the general reaction.
Yeah.
And again, that kind of reflection that, and it's something I would say about my experience of it as well. You've been doing something for years. You've been doing something a particular way. So I'd like to think that I've always tried to see the best in people. In teams that I've had, I like to think that I've always looked for the good in someone, and I've tried to develop that or use that to develop the side of them maybe that needed a little bit of work. But to have something, a philosophy, a program that says to you, yeah, that's the right way to do it, it's very affirming. So when something's resonating with you so much and you're thinking, crikey, somebody else thinks this too, it makes it much easier for you. It's a very powerful thing. It's quite empowering actually for a leader. And that's what the more experienced heads have said. It kind of said, yeah, you're on the right track. You're doing the right thing.
That's really good.
Yeah.
And we've had a question. I have to put my glasses on to read it. Following on from Penny's question, how can you help new managers gain insight and awareness of the gap between being a manager and the need to develop as a leader? This is a challenge in the business world, so I imagine it would be in academia, but the obstacle is often personal lack of insight. Okay, how can you help new managers gain insight and awareness of the gap? You answer it first, and then I'll have a crack afterwards.
Yeah. Okay.
Question.
I'm just trying to think of a kind of an example of how we've done that kind of in some of our schools. So I think it's really important when somebody takes on a new leadership role that you don't just throw them in and leave them. So one of the things that we build in is regular meetings and catch-ups with those new leaders, and it's about having very honest and open conversations with them about how things are going. So if often a new leader, particularly at senior leadership level, will have to implement change, will have to follow through development plans. And the trap that people will fall into is the management side. So you're planning out, time frames and putting your Gantt charts together and deciding who's going to do what. But as a coach, or a mentor, if you're going down the mentoring route, you're talking to that person and saying, well, okay, so how are we going to do that? How are we going to work with our teams? What are you going to say to people? How are you going to get people on board? And it's navigating that kind of leadership journey. What I would say is, because more of our leaders are now going through PLP, it's getting easier, because what you can say is, okay, right, well we've dealt with the blue now, we know what we're doing there, and we're using these systems and these processes, but how are we going to get this to work? How are we going to inspire the people in your team to want to do this? Who's going to be the person that drives this? Who's the person you're going to use to pull that out and get that to happen? So I think it's going to get easier in that way. But for us at the moment, it's just keeping that channel of conversation open and making sure that that's there.
Yeah, and that's all really interesting the way you talk about that. And Karina, I'd like to, Katie, can you put the question up again for me, please? Karina, I'd like to just share some of my thoughts here with you. I don't know what position you are in an organization. I don't know if you're very senior. I don't know. But your last bit about it's often a personal lack of insight. Oh, wow. It is absolutely spot on that. But I want you to just recognize if I share with you, I think you probably know that my journey of understanding leadership didn't start until I was 50. And it was through personal circumstances that were all pretty tough, pretty shitty, frankly. And it gave me a heck of a wake up call. And that was when my leadership journey started. So for me, I had absolutely no understanding about what management meant, what leadership meant, what anything. Now, I'd had 6 children. Through loving them, really loving them, and having made so many mistakes in my life, I didn't want them to make the same mistakes. So what I did was I was always doing my best to guide them, to advise them, to sort out their problems for them, to point out if they were about to do something that was stupid, all through loving and caring. That's straightforward management. And so I brought up my children until they were grown up, because I had all my children before I was 30. So I brought up all my children through loving them, managing them. I was educating them that they couldn't do it without me. I was teaching them how not to think for themselves. And of course, they could never be better than I was yesterday because it all came out of my experience. So if you are in an organization, I I mentioned earlier about how often people are promoted. They go back on Friday as a salesman or engineer, whatever, and they come back as a manager on Monday. And how can you know to do things differently? And everything in you drives you towards saying, I'm now in a position of authority. I've got to know the answers. I've got to make sure that I can take them the right way. So everything is driving you without you being aware of it towards managing you, towards managing people. I've got to know everything. I've got to be the one who gives them the best advice. I've got to help them when they're in trouble. So everything guides you towards being a manager, but you don't know that there's a different way to do it. Now, if you're in an organization where now you do understand it, but people don't understand in a similar way, then you need to start thinking about the way you can ask questions to get them to have a bit of a wake up. So it may be that you then ask a question. If they start, I don't know, giving lots of advice in a meeting, maybe come up with a question along the lines of, if you knew it could be really good if we all take responsibility for finding our own way through this, how would you feel about that? Would you give us the opportunity? Find ways to ask questions to get them to maybe wake up, because I I feel so sad. I can even get top teams of corporates. Okay, I don't deliver programs now, but I used to. And I can still remember, I'd nearly always ask at the beginning of the program, do you think you're more towards being a manager, managing, or more towards leading? And of course, if they were very senior, they already assumed that they were leaders. So they turn more towards leadership. We could then demonstrate to them very clearly that by halfway through day one, that we could show them that they may be a leader in their heart, but what was coming out of their mouth was straightforward management. And that's what really rocks people, because they don't understand what it is they're doing, because they're doing it nearly always for the best reasons in the world. And yet it's the least useful thing that they could be doing. What they're teaching people all the time is those 3 things. You can't do it without me, teaching you not to think for yourself, and you can never be better than I was yesterday. So an awareness, the only way you're going to create awareness around you, and I don't know if you're an organization that's understanding this or not, but if you're not, your role needs to become, how can I ask questions to get people to wake up there may be another way? If you knew that giving that person the opportunity to think it through for themselves could help them improve and give you the best opportunity for a tremendous outcome, how do you think you could go about that? But I don't know, Karina, the position you're in. But I'm sorry, that was a kind of long explanation, but I hope that that was giving you a bit of an insight. and useful, because you're absolutely right. Your last sentence, how do you get them to be aware if they don't have the insights? It's not easy. And we've had another long thing come up. Okay, here we go. Thank you for sharing your story. I'm smart because we have a lot in common when it comes to our parents, including the work they did. My question is, as a professional and as a parent, is it possible to pass on to students the good fortune of having such access to school? Sometimes even in companies, we're not responsible for what we're able to do, and we choose to complain instead of being grateful, taking for granted what we have. How can you work on that with your students? Do you think, hold on, how do you think? And then he stopped. Do you think? I don't know, but that's a really interesting thing to ask you. So I'm going to hand that straight over to you, Anita.
Right. Okay. The short answer is I think we do a lot with students now to help them to understand the value of education. Many of the schools in our trust have a higher than average number of students from disadvantaged backgrounds. So it's very much in the ether of the staff, certainly, that for many of these children, their time in school is their one shot. You know, we talk to teachers quite a lot about every lesson you deliver is that class's one shot at getting something. And so we have a responsibility to do the very, very best we can to help the students get the most out of it. But when it comes to the students, I think it's the culture and the ethos that you develop in the school. You know, it's about developing a shared language of the wonder of education and what it can do for you. And that might happen formally. So certainly when I was a head, and I know the heads in our trust will do this, there will be lots of assemblies or times when you're sharing with the students where actually you talk about very explicitly the power of education and what education can do. And actually, we talk to them a lot about the fact that they have a responsibility to use their gifts and talents for the wider world. I mean, I'm sure it's not just true of schools that aren't Catholic schools, but there is an element within a kind of Christian teaching, that idea that you are a unique human being and that you have gifts and talents and that you have a purpose in life. And school, in some ways, is a little bit about you finding out what those gifts and talents are. You know, what is it that excites me, that energizes me, that I want to do when I leave school? And then maybe start to think about what your purpose might be. You know, what are you going to give to the world? And I think that very much resonates with that idea of the value of education. You know, it's not that you just come into school and you're doing your lessons. It's you're on this journey, and you need to do something with that. So yeah, there's that explicit side of it, and then a very, very powerful relationship in secondary schools. You get it in primary schools as well, probably even more so, is that individual relationship between the teacher and the individual child. And again, this is something that comes through in teacher training now really, really well. And it is that idea that you need to really engage and touch the lives of the children in your class. You need to know them. You know, if we reflect on Living Leader, it's good old-fashioned appreciation. You know, you see the child in front of you, you know that child, and you start to talk to them and to bring out in them what's special, what gifts they have. And it's particularly important in those that maybe struggle a little bit with school, because they're fighting against it, usually through fear. They don't think they're good enough. They don't think they're academic enough, or they don't think, you know, they fit in with their peers. So that responsibility of the teacher to be working with that child and developing that is also building that culture. You are important. There is something really special in you, and your job is to work on that and release it, so you will make something of it. So that's the culture we try and develop within our schools. The sad thing is, you do this work with students, and I can still remember faces and names of little ones going back. I've been teaching, I think I've been in 34 years or so, and you're there, you see them through their journey, you set them on the path. You never really, though, see where they go and what happens. I mean, occasionally, you bump into someone, you get a letter or an email, and it's wonderful. It just makes your day, it makes your week when someone comes back and says, "Oh, miss, because of you, I did this." But very often we just do what we can, and we hope that inside we've got that flame, going, but we never necessarily know whether we have succeeded with all of them. So,
yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. I think getting children to focus on, we're all terribly good at complaining. Very good at it. I probably I have an A star in it, I think, at things that I used to complain about. But once you really get your head around how important it is to focus on the things that you have in your life rather than the things that you haven't, or the things that are good, that to me is so important. And I think that's what Famin's saying about, what is it we can do to help our children be grateful for what they have, however small those little gratitudes are. How can we help them focus on what they have got rather than constantly worrying about what they haven't got? And as you say, that is to an extent down to a teacher and what they put their attention on, which is so can be so powerful. Now, one of the things that we haven't talked about at all is, as you know, we are now starting, and we've launched, and we've done both the virtual and the live, the Future Leaders Programme.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about teaching leadership to children as young as 16?
Well, we've piloted one program so far. So we did that in the summer term last year. Actually, I think the last day was the final week of term. So I've had some feedback from the trainer. We had Patrick. I'm sorry, I've forgotten Patrick's surname, but Patrick was a wonderful trainer. And Patrick gave some feedback from the first 2 days, and then we got some feedback from the students. And I've had a bit of a catch up on the third day. So it's still early days, but it's very, very exciting. So for a start, again, a bit like for leaders, maybe, there's a gap in this kind of area of development for youngsters. I mean, honestly, there's so much done in schools to enable children to have great opportunities now. The extracurricular side within the state sector in many schools is absolutely stunning. So we do a lot, but I didn't think we were doing anything like the Living Leader programme. So when you approached us and said, do you think you'd like to try this with children? I thought, let's give it a go, because everyone always says, I wish I'd done this earlier. So, that begs the question, well, how early should we go? So we thought sixth formers would be good. They've got the time, maybe the time in the curriculum where they can devote to that. They're a little bit more reflective once they get to 16. It's not quite the horror of the kind of like mid-teen years. So we asked schools to recommend students who they could see had some potential maybe in the future to go down a leadership pathway, but maybe who weren't head girls, head boys, so they weren't having a whole raft of other opportunities that might give them the chance to develop those skills. So they started, and the feedback from the first 2 days was really interesting. There were things that I thought, oh, that's really going to resonate with them. They're going to be like, oh, wow, that's incredible. So some of those definitely were the case, but then there were other things that I think myself and Nicola Taylor weren't expecting. So to start with, they really got stimulus response. That I think was something that was very, very powerful for them, and it's not surprising, really. Even as adults, that tendency to be reactive, something happens, an event happens, and boom, you're in, and you feel like you've got to respond straight away, is much sharper, I think, in young people. And the lives they live at the moment with kind of constant social media, they're on the phones, they're on whatever, and something happens and they feel they have to react instantly. And it's very disempowering, and it causes them loads of problems, and they don't know how to get out of that loop. So just explicitly teaching the idea of the pause, a nice proactive response, and sharing that notion that you have choice, and it's your choice, it's your responsibility, but it's also your choice. Very powerful. They really got that. And, that's something that I think came through very, very well. I think the other side of it was by something that's starting to come through in the feedback that we've had so far, is that wider notion around responsibility. You see, I think maybe as a society, we're disempowering youngsters quite a lot. There's a lot of you shouldn't do that, and a little bit like you were talking with your own children, Penny. We're managing them very, very carefully, and not enabling them to take responsibility, to make their choices, to learn from them. We're very, very focused on, I think, narrowing down what they do, and I think they started to pick up on that, and see the excitement in it. That when you start to think, actually, I could have this life. And again, with the visioning exercise, crikey, I've never really thought about that. What's the kind of life I want? And if that's the kind of life I want, what kind of do I need to do in order to get there? And it's wider than just, I need to do these A-levels, I need to get into this university or this apprenticeship. It's wider than that. It's much more about the person I want to be, the things, the exciting things I want to do, the kind of life I want to live. It was much bigger, I think, than we've done in schools before. So that again seemed to open some of their minds, and I'm really excited about that for disadvantaged students, because one of the issues that we sometimes face with children from particularly disadvantaged backgrounds is that they haven't had the opportunity to see some of those things themselves. So they don't live in a community or circumstances where they think people like me might do that. And that narrows their lives. And, I go back to my parents. My parents did the opposite, hard work, school, you can do anything you want. But sadly for some children, that's not the case. And they don't see the opportunities that might be out there for them, and therefore I think that for that group of children, the programme could be particularly valuable and particularly kind of life-changing. So that's something I think we're looking at in the future when we run more programmes. But finally, so the bit I wasn't expecting to come out quite as strongly was that idea of character and persona. That really got to them.
Really?
Really was something that they wanted to think. And Patrick mentioned this, I think, in some feedback he gave to Nicola and to myself as well. But I reflected upon it afterwards, and I'd like to speak to the students a bit more to learn more about why that was the case. So I'm just kind of going on my reflections rather than direct conversations. But I was talking to my grown-up children about it. And, my daughter said to me, Mum, she said, look, I can't even put a picture up on Facebook without filtering it, without changing it, without making it look great. You know, that drive to be this perfection, this kind of that you want to present an image, you want to present a look, and that's what you do, is so huge with this generation. And as an older person and someone who's not, you know, I do very little social media, anything like that. It's just not something I would even consider. But for them, it's a pressure, that huge pressure to be the persona that you think you should be. So that ability to have a discussion around who is your authentic true self, and how can you be comfortable in that being what you present, I think is a really interesting thing. So I'd like to find out more about why they were interested in that.
Wow, I'm glad you shared that with me, because I don't think you'd told me this before, and that's really interesting. I hadn't even thought about that, but of course it is. The pressures are on them all the time, and I believe about the most important characteristic to be a great leader is being authentic, and I think that many people may not understand that actually being authentic can take huge courage. You know, it's not something you just say, oh yeah, be authentic, be who you are.
Yeah.
It's not quite as easy as that. You know, and forgive me for those of you who've heard this story before, but I got challenged very early on after I started this journey when I was about, I suppose this happened when I was about 52, 53. So I was delivering the program, but I was still in the stages of not being in 100% confident or all of that. You know, I was still doing that. And I wanted to go and do a speaking engagement, and it was probably to, I don't know, between about 75, 100 people, predominantly male, and predominantly from the sort of IT industry. So rather more left brain than right brain, you might say. And they'd asked me to talk about responsibility. Now, when I talk about responsibility and when I share it, I will share my journey and how I screwed up repeatedly, and how I began to understand responsibility. And that's where the responsibility model that we use on the program came from, recognizing, you know, the beliefs and create the behaviors and expect all of that stuff. And you could see some people in the audience sort of going, oh God, too much information. Others really fascinated. So it was, you could see the difference. I could feel it in the room. And I suppose it was about an hour talk. Anyway, at the end of it, I got the feedback afterwards, and the feedback literally ranged from amazing, fascinating, really got that, found it amazing, through to too much information, too personal, didn't need all that stuff. And I had to think about it really hard. And I did. I spent some time, some considerable time, really thinking about it, thinking, okay, I've got a choice here. Am I going to conform to, and this isn't quite true now, but the sort of bog standard consultant way, tell people what you're doing, but don't necessarily tell them about who you are and how you learnt it? So I thought about it for probably damn near a month, really thinking about it, thinking, okay, am I going to have the courage to be me and be authentic, tell my personal story, and accept that some people won't like it, some clients won't want to work with us because it is too personal, or am I going to conform? And I chose to be authentic. But it was a tough decision, but one I've never regretted, never regretted. So it's not always easy to be authentic, which is kind of interesting. How easy do you find it?
I'm just when you were talking there, Penny, that kind of again resonated quite a lot with some of the experiences that I've had through my career. It's funny, isn't it? You know, that idea of sharing and being open. I think I'm naturally that way. I mean, actually, being part of a huge extended Irish family, everyone was very open, and you know, most people kind of did a lot of sharing, and were very direct about a lot of things. And I think I've naturally been that way for a long time. And it's funny because I can think of a team that I was on where I was at my unhappiest, and I certainly didn't thrive at all. And it was because that was really frowned on. And it was a team where there was very, very little sharing. I don't think they certainly didn't know me. They might have known each other a little bit more. It was mainly a male team. They used to do that thing where they met in the morning and had coffee, and then you found out afterwards. And then there'd be a meeting, and the decisions had been made in the morning. So you think, well, I don't know what the point of me being here is. But they kind of didn't know me as a person. And if I'm honest, I didn't know them either. I didn't know what made them tick. I didn't know the obstacles in their lives. And there was one incident, I won't go into details, but I'd had a real personal tragedy in my life in my 20s that really goes to the core of who I am now. It was very difficult, and something happened, and I mentioned it to this person. It kind of came out. It came out in the natural part of the conversation, and he didn't say anything. And then a bit later, I was kind of basically told that was too much sharing, and that's not what we do, And it was like somebody had gone, and I didn't feel I had permission to be me anymore. So that's influenced me as a leader, because I think we have to give our staff permission to be authentic, and we do that by modelling it. We do that by being ourselves. We do that by being. I'm very open about the amount of mistakes I make. Maybe I shouldn't be quite so open, but I'm always sharing. I didn't do that right, got that wrong. And I think that helps people be honest and feel that they can say when there are issues. In fact, one of the questions, I think the first question we were asked, I think if you are very honest with your team about things that you get wrong, they're more likely to have more insight into what leadership is. You model that for them. And just coming back to Living Leader, the single most powerful part for me of that program was the trust exercise at the beginning, because I'd never done anything like that ever. And I walked into that room, and you know what I'm going to say? I looked around the room and I kind of went, don't like you. You're not my kind of person. Don't think I'll be sitting with you. I know, she's awful. I mean, what a terrible thing to admit. And then we went through that. And by the end of it, this young woman who I thought was rather standoffish, and oh dear, she was in IT as well. And I'm sorry, I had lots of preconceptions. My God, she was so interesting. And there were so many things that we shared. And by the end of the 3 days, that there was a bond there. And more importantly, a very deep understanding. Because in that team where we didn't share, in any meeting, we went straight into defense and attack. There was no really deep discussion. It was just who's going to win, who's right, who's going to get the better of this particular topic. And in teams where people are open and authentic, that's where you actually are your most productive. That's where the good stuff happens. And for me, that's the bit of leadership I really want to get across to the leaders in our schools. Work on those relationships, and shut up a bit and listen more to your team, which I think is the other thing that I learned from the programme quite a lot.
I have to say that you're absolutely right. It is so critical. And I can still remember, I did do a programme. This was going back, about 10 years, for a top team for school. And I went back to see them about, 3 months after they'd completed the programme to say what's changed. And I always remember the deputy head saying to me, he said, I'll never, just like you, I will never forget that first exercise.
Yeah.
He said, I thought I knew my team. He said, I didn't know them at all. He said, you cannot believe it. Our meetings are different. We work together differently. We're achieving much more. He said, the whole culture of the place has changed. He said, I realized I didn't know them. He said, some of those I've worked with for 14 years. what a bloody waste of 14 years. And you think,
Yeah.
God. And yet, and there's another CEO who I've worked with, every company that he's gone into, taken us in. And so I'm now going back literally 28 years probably. And we're still working with him. And the very first time that he went through the program, oh my God, he was uncomfortable doing it. You know, and we had some very in-depth conversations. Why do people need to know about me? Why, you know, why do they need to? Why is it important? And now he is so open about him, about who he is, about everything. He's one of the best leaders that I know. But I think the last program that I did for him, which was, I don't, as you know, deliver programs now. And I delivered, I suppose, the last one about 7-8 years ago. And we didn't bloody finish the introductions till 4. And I was thinking, how the hell am I going to get through the program? But he said, Penny, if you didn't do anything else in the 2 days, I have got everything I need out of this. I know my team. And as you know, to have a high performing team, the absolute one thing you have to have, or you'll never have a team, is trust. Well, if people don't know who the hell you are, how are you going to build trust if they don't know the real person? And, you know, he said for him, that was just the most critical thing. And he didn't almost mind about the rest of the program.
No, that resonates. That's something I would say was probably the biggest point of learning from going through Living Leader. And everyone talks about it. Every participant we've had on it talks about that, and they'll often talk about how uncomfortable they were, you know, but then they're so glad that they did, and how they're going back and using it in their own teams, and it's having the same effect. So,
did you get any feedback from the young people about how they found that?
Oh, yeah, now that was interesting, and I think again it's something we probably need to rethink or speak to them in a little bit more depth about. So, if we think they come from different high schools, so they don't know each other.
Yeah.
There was more of a fear, I think, about if I share, where's that information going? Even though, you know, obviously you set the parameters, and I know Patrick will have done that. This is within the confines of this room, and this is what we do. That deep-rooted fear, I think, that youngsters have about, you know, revealing themselves was difficult for them. So I think they did open up. Some of them more than others, but I don't think maybe all of them opened up as much as you would have wanted them to, or you would have liked them to, at that stage of the program. But over the course of the 3 days, I think having been through that, it made them kind of more open and more aware with each other. Does that make sense? I'm not sure I've explained that very well.
I think you've explained it absolutely perfectly, and it is an interesting one to think about, because that says something about the culture of young people now.
Yeah.
And it is because of all the things, I think, like social media, that all of that's going out. You can understand why they have such low levels of trust, but that's going to make it very interesting for them when they start their career and going into work. Are they going to carry that fear with them? Because that obviously is going to hold them back. So I think that's something, Anita, that we need to really think about and think, is there anything that we can do or change or modify to help them recognize the importance of it? And it's nothing like the same. But when I was sharing my story about, I had to think about, was I going to be authentic? I had to accept that there were some people who wouldn't like me, wouldn't want to work with me. There'll be clients who would say, no, she's much too personal, whatever. And that's a tiny version of exactly the same thing. You're needing to make a choice. Are you prepared to be open and vulnerable, recognizing that there are times when it's going to come around and bite you in the bum? But are you still going to make that choice? And it's not an easy one. Oh, we've had something else come up. Looking at the impact the Living Leader program within education has been really insightful. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
So that's nice. So let me ask you one last question. I've only got a couple of minutes left.
Mhm.
I've got 1 minute. If you were now in government,
Oh,
how would you want to persuade them to bring this in to schools?
I think that it's been a long time since we've had real vision for education, and successive governments, and I'm not on a particular team. I promise you, successive governments have, I think, tinkered around the edges with education, and it's time now to do something that would have a profound impact. Interestingly, Penny, there are countries where the different parties have got together and said our children are the most important thing we have, and our children's future is the future of our country. That's where all the productivity, that's where all the good stuff. So we are investing in our children. And they've done things like, I think Jamaica's one of the countries where the different parties said, right, do you know what we're going to do? We're going to work on a strategy and we're all going to agree to it. It doesn't matter who's in, we're going to follow it. Because they've got that vision for the future of education. So within that notion, that idea that our children are going to be what makes this country as great as it possibly can be, that's why you need to take some risks and look at how we really, really develop our young ones. And you and I have touched briefly today on some of the things that they face, some of the difficulties, the world, navigating social media, navigating being a true person, navigating being able to do that. This programme does that for them. So I would really love them to look into it and think about how this could be something that we made available to more of our young ones.
Then we need to find a way to do it, Anita.
We do. We do.
We've slightly run over time.
Okay.
First of all, let me thank you so much. I've thoroughly enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you. You too. It's been a nice morning.
What I'd also like to say is, are you happy for people to contact you if they've got any questions that they'd like to ask you about either your, teaching young people, anything? Are you happy for us to give your email address to
anybody? Absolutely. I'm going to have to be honest here. I do have a LinkedIn account, but I am dreadful about using it. I'm so sorry, everyone. I really don't use it very much. But if you email me, I promise I will get back in touch. Absolutely.
Okay. Anita, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure.
Okay. Thank you, Penny.
And we'll find a way to get...
We will. We'll do that.
Yeah.
Okay. Take care now. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.